On July 23, President Donald Trump announced a landmark tariffs for investment deal with Japan that, honestly, signals the end of the traditional free trade agenda for all U.S. allies. Under the agreement, Japanese imports into the United States will carry a uniform 15% tariff, down from the 25% that was initially threatened, while Japan commits to a $550 billion investment package encompassing direct investments and loans, with 90% of the returns to accrue to U.S. entities. Trump portrayed the pact as one of the largest trade deals in history, emphasizing that Japan will open their country to trade, including cars and trucks, rice, and other agricultural products, and he hailed the investment as a major boost to American jobs and industries. This deal is one of the few trade agreements the U.S. administration has concluded with any country. Now both Canada and the EU, each aiming for the August 1st deadline, are reassessing their positions and exploring new measures and potential plans. Both Canada and the EU are facing the prospect of hefty U.S. tariffs on goods worth staggering sums. In 2024, bilateral trade between the EU and the United States totaled approximately $1,090 billion, while total trade in goods and services between Canada and the U.S. reached about $920 billion. Given these vast flows, duties on such volumes would send shockwaves through every economy involved. Tariffs applied to more than $2 trillion in annual trade could drive up costs for American consumers and manufacturers, disrupt cross-border supply chains, and weigh heavily on U.S. economic growth. Without further ado, let's first examine the EU's approach, then delve into Canada's response. The European Union is preparing to retaliate swiftly if the United States follows through on President Donald Trump's threat to impose 30% tariffs on the bloc's exports after August 1st. Drawing on its most powerful trade defense, the anti-coercion instrument, the EU would target roughly €100 billion, or about $117 billion, of U.S. goods with matching levies. This package would combine an already approved list covering €21 billion of imports and a previously proposed list on an additional €72 billion of products, ranging from Boeing aircraft and American-made automobiles to bourbon whiskey, into a single countermeasure ready to take effect next month in the event that no agreement is reached and Washington imposes its new duties. Brussels' anti-coercion mechanism, which requires a qualified majority of member states to activate, is designed primarily as a deterrent, but if deployed it would open the door to a broad spectrum of retaliatory actions, imposing fresh taxes on U.S. technology giants, restricting American investments in Europe, and even limiting U.S. businesses' access to EU markets. Several capitals, including Berlin, have signaled willingness to support its activation should talks fail. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz underscored the urgency of securing a fair, reliable agreement with low tariffs, warning that failure to do so would inject unwelcome uncertainty into an already fragile global economy. Despite the looming threat, both sides remain engaged in negotiations aimed at averting a full-blown trade war. EU and US officials are scheduled to resume talks this week as European leaders visit Tokyo and Beijing to reinforce alliances with key Asian partners. Washington's recent deals with the Philippines and Japan, which featured lower-than-threatened duties, have raised hopes in Brussels that a similar compromise might emerge. Yet with U.S. demands for near-universal rates above 10% and exemptions narrowing to aviation, certain medical devices, and a handful of other sectors, the EU is bracing for a tough impasse. Beyond retaliatory tariffs, the Commission is also exploring additional measures such as export controls and restrictions on services and public procurement contracts, ensuring that the bloc will have a suite of options should Washington press ahead with its highest threat level. Now let's turn to the comments from Canadian officials, particularly those made during the Premier's meeting that has been underway since Monday. Last night, Prime Minister Mark Carney noted that forest products have been subject to a separate, longer-standing U.S. trade process. There's a legal process, he said, but Canada is working to align that timeline with broader negotiations and has worker support proposals ready as the August 1st deadline approaches. He stressed that although steel has taken the heaviest hit and aluminum somewhat less, outside of those very important sectors, steel, aluminum, automobiles, forest products, prospectively copper and pharmaceuticals, the effective tariff that faces most Canadian goods and services is very low. Reaffirming a forward-looking stance, Carney emphasized Canada's focus on nation-building and diversifying global ties, while still aiming to build up to President Trump and secure better terms with the United States. Asked about a potential no deal by August 1st, he remained undeterred. "We're working to get the best deal for Canadians, and that's the focus now," reflecting widespread domestic optimism that, even if disputes persist south of the border, Canada will continue to build at home. Ontario Premier Doug Ford took an even firmer stance on trade and tariffs and was equally forthright when discussing U.S. trade. With the August 1st deadline looming, he affirmed that we're all standing united right now, and we need to unleash every tool we have in the Canadian toolbox. He praised the collective resolve of premiers, the Prime Minister, and First Nations, noting that no matter if it's the ambassadors, the premiers, the Prime Minister, First Nations communities, that we have to move faster, quicker, immediate. And while he acknowledged the necessity of discretion, "I don't want to jeopardize his negotiations by divulging everything," he nonetheless remarked that Donald Trump is very, very hard to deal with. It's constantly moving with him, underscoring, really, the unpredictability with which Canada must contend. Never one to mince words, Ford made clear that Canada will not be cowed by American tariff threats. "When President Trump says we don't need Canada, we all know he needs Canada," he declared. "They need our oil, they need the potash, they need the uranium. They need a high-grade nickel, they need the aluminum from Quebec, just to name a few." Therefore, he argued, any U.S. levy must be met in kind. We hit them hard, dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. He warned that if you're weak, they will run us over like you've never seen before. They prey on weakness. Well, we aren't weak. Ford also spotlighted the broader economic imperative behind these fights. Canada, he reminded his colleagues, is an economic powerhouse around the world, purchasing more U.S. goods than China, Japan, Korea, France, the UK, and even Mexico combined. "I'll put our 41 million people against anyone in the world," he said, but to maintain that edge, he argued, Ottawa must purge outdated rules. He cited a decades-old federal regulation mandating 44-inch pipeline pipe when energy firms had already told him they'd accept 42-inch, 2 inches off buried away in some regulation and is buried away for no reason, and urged, "Let's change it." Finally, Ford linked all these themes, trade, infrastructure, regulation, back to a simple imperative: national unity and speed. "We're in a fight like we've never been before," he conceded. "But we have all the tools, we have the opportunities." He praised premiers from Manitoba to Quebec working in tandem on roads to the Ring of Fire, critical minerals permitting, and even wildfire response. "It's all Team Canada right now," he concluded, urging that we stop talking and start moving to secure Canada's future prosperity. Premier David Eby used his opening remarks to position British Columbia as a steadfast partner to the United States, even in the face of rising trade tensions and tariff threats. He began by underscoring the strength of Canada-US cooperation in the Pacific Northwest. "We've worked in close partnership with those states for many, many years on flood mitigation, economic growth, the Cascadia Corridor. It's grown our economies. We've all benefited from it." Yet, he could not ignore the recent diplomatic flare-ups, echoing Canada's broader boycott of American goods and travel in protest of Washington's aggressive trade stance. Eby took aim at comments made by the newly appointed United States ambassador. "I'd like to take a moment to reflect on the comments of the American ambassador about his support for the president's comments that Canadians are mean and nasty because we are boycotting American liquor and refusing to travel to the United States while they attack our sovereignty and threaten our economy through the president." Far from sulking under that critique, he embraced it as a badge of honor. "If you're a mean and nasty Canadian for standing up for our sovereignty and our economy and our jobs, I think most Canadians would be proud to be considered mean and nasty." Still, Eby stressed that this moment of friction must not derail the deeper bonds that tie the two nations together. He made clear that what Canada seeks is not confrontation but honestly a renewed appreciation in Washington of the mutual benefits of free and fair exchange. He said, "We want to be in partnership with the Americans and we need the president to understand the benefits that flow from working in cooperation." With those words, he really encapsulated British Columbia's, and by extension Canada's, stance firm in defense of national interests, unapologetic in its pushback against overreaching tariffs, yet unwavering in its commitment to a constructive Canada-United States relationship. Quebec Premier François Legault also echoed the comment by Ford saying, "We would like to have the ideal deal as fast as possible." "But what can we get?" he asked, cautioning that you almost need to ask Donald Trump, and I'm not even sure he knows himself what he wants. Echoing Carney's view that achieving a good deal is more important than hitting a deadline, Legault stressed that Canada's negotiators will use all the time that's necessary. Premier Houston was frank about how the looming United States duties have reshaped Canada's approach to Washington. He said, "The impact of the tariff situation, it's a really hard thing for Canadians. Obviously, Canadians are galvanized, and I would definitely say that it has brought the federal government and the provincial governments closer together." On how Canada should respond, he deferred to Ottawa's negotiators, saying, "There's people at the negotiating table that have more information. They're kind of working to a strategy." I actually have tremendous confidence in the Prime Minister and the team that is representing us as Canadians to come up with the best deal for Canadians. Acknowledging the White House's famously shifting positions, he warned, "The U.S. administration changes their thoughts on things quite frequently, yet insisted Canada must remain focused on what is the best possible deal for Canadians, not on an arbitrary deadline." Asked about the August 1st tariff trigger, Houston cautioned that pressing the calendar could cost leverage. "I haven't been focused on the date. I would be worried that if we constrain ourselves that we have to get a deal by a certain date, we might have to give up some leverage that we might not otherwise have." And when pressed on what the best deal would actually look like, he struck a balanced note. "Obviously no tariffs is great, but we're not in that world right now. We have to be open-minded about what that might look like. The USMCA carve-out is really important to our country, so keeping that intact is really, really important." Finally, on the question of retaliatory measures, he urged prudence. "We have to be conscious of the impact on our own economy because there is one as well. It's finding that balance between pushing back a little bit but never losing sight of what the ultimate goal is, and that's the best possible deal under the circumstances we face." Thank you for watching. As an independent channel, we don't have corporate backing. We rely on your support to keep going. If you found this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps more people find our work. Thank you so much for being part of our community. Check out the next video on your screen. We picked it just for you.